decimal places. In fact, it's the rounding when we're talking about when we're rounding to 2 decimal places or round that number to 3 decimal places. This is what we're going to look at now. And I'm going to use a very well-known mathematical constant. I'm going to use pi, which I'm going to write down now. Okay, so pi, that's the symbol for pi. If I was writing it in words, it would just be pi, and it's the relationship between the diameter and the circumference of a circle. But the value of pi, when I press the pi button on my calculator, I will end up, depending on how long my calculator screen is for the display of the numbers, it's going to be something like this: 3.141592654. The value of pi actually carries on. It keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. It doesn't stop at any point. It just keeps going. But how much detail we need really depends on what type of calculation we're doing. But having the first few numbers of pi is usually plenty of detail for what we're likely to do. So if I'm using the value of pi in a calculation, I can just press the pi button on my calculator, and that will use the value of pi to this amount of accuracy. But when I end up with a final answer, I don't necessarily need to write down all of the digits on my calculator. You may see that you might be asked to give your answer rounding to 3 decimal places, for instance. So what does that mean, rounding to 3 decimal places? Okay, so my first decimal place is the first number after the decimal point. So there's my decimal point. My first decimal place is this number here. So let's put that here. So that's my first decimal place. That's the first. And then the second decimal place is this one here, because that's the second number after the decimal point. And then the third decimal place, you can see, I've just got first, second and third. I've just taken the first 3 digits straight after the decimal point. So I don't necessarily need all of that detail, but if I am rounding to 3 decimal places, so if I put 3DP for short, that's standing for 3 decimal places, I must look at this next number. I must look at the 4th decimal place. In this case, it's a 5. We know from rounding that 5 is strong enough to round my number up. So that 5, I've looked at it, and I am going to round up my value of pi. Instead of it being 3.14, I'm not going to write 141, I'm going to write 142, because it has pushed up that 1 to make a 2. And obviously in my answer, when I've rounded it to 3 decimal places, I've still maintained the correct place value, so I've still got the 3 units, so it's 3.142. If I was looking at the value of pi just correct to 2 decimal places, so if I'm just looking at 2 decimal places, I'm now going to be having less detail because I'm looking at a smaller number of decimal places. So for 2 decimal places, I've got my 1, because that's my first decimal place, the first digit after the decimal point. Then the 4, that's the second digit after the decimal point. And then I would look at that 1, and the 1 is not strong enough to increase the value of this digit here, so that would become 3.14. So the value of pi correct to 2 decimal places is 3.14, because the next digit would have been a 1, which is low. If I was looking at pi correct to 3 decimal places, it would in fact be 3.142, because that 1 was raised because of that 5. But looking at pi on the calculator will give me lots of digits into a greater amount of detail. Okay, so the golden rules that we need to remember when we're dealing with rounding with decimal places. So the first decimal place is the digit that's in the tenths column, or the first digit after the decimal point. And then the second decimal place is the digit that's in the hundredths column, or the one that's in 2 digits after the decimal point. And so on the third decimal place, 3 digits after the decimal point. And then you look at the next column to see if you round up or down. So if you're rounding to 2 decimal places, you need to look at the third digit after the decimal point to decide if you're rounding up or down. If you're rounding to 3 decimal places, you would be looking at the fourth digit after the decimal point to decide if you're rounding up or down. And of course, don't forget to include any of the digits to the left of the decimal point, your tens, your hundreds, your units. Those figures still need to be recorded.